You don't need to be here. This company isn't a nursing home for useless old people. That's what my daughter-in-law said to me loudly, in front of nearly 100 employees, board members, and senior executives. And yes, I am her mother-in-law. I am also Evelyn Thomas, founder of the very company she now parades through like she owns the place. The party was supposed to be a celebration. Quarterly results were in, numbers were strong, and my son Michael, now CEO, wanted to thank the team with something elegant. So we gathered at a ballroom downtown, all dressed in blues and silvers, clinking glasses under golden light. But I'll remember it for that one sentence. Sarah had learned quickly that attention was a currency. She used it like a weapon. After the sentence left her mouth, there was a half-second of silence, the kind that tells you everyone heard it. Then came the nervous laughter. A few people smiled. A few looked away. Most did what people always do when power speaks. They followed. I felt the heat rush to my face, but I kept my posture straight. Age has a way of teaching you how to hold yourself when the world tries to fold you in half. I turned slightly, intending to step back, to remove myself before my dignity bled out in public. That's when it happened. As I shifted my weight, Sarah moved too quick, careless, theatrical. Her heel caught the edge of my shoe. Not an accident. I know the difference. I felt the push of her calf against mine, just enough to throw me off balance. I stumbled. My arm flew out instinctively, grasping for air, for a shoulder, for anything. Instead, I crashed straight into the champagne tower. Glass shattered. The sound was violent, sharp cracks and cascading crashes as flutes toppled, one after another, exploding against the marble floor. Cold champagne soaked through my dress. A jagged edge of glass sliced into my forearm. I hit the ground hard, my hips screaming in protest, my palms burning as I tried to brace myself. I heard gasps, then laughter. Blood ran down my arm, thin at first, then heavier, dripping onto the floor and mixing with spilled champagne. I remember thinking how strange it was that something meant for celebration could look so much like a mess when it shattered. Sarah shrieked, not in concern, but in performance. "Oh my God, Evelyn! You should really be more careful. At your age, falls can be dangerous." She laughed softly, hand to her mouth, eyes shining. "This is exactly why we try to keep these events professional." Professional. A few people rushed forward, but not to help me. They hovered, unsure, watching Sarah to see how they were supposed to react. Someone muttered something about liability. Another joked that the champagne tower had always been a bad idea. And then, as if on cue, the tone shifted. "Well, she shouldn't have been so close," someone said. "These things happen," another added, smiling at Sarah as if she were the injured party. I looked up, still on the floor, blood on my arm, my legs trembling. I searched the room for one face. Michael. My son stood a few feet away. He looked at me then, at Sarah. I saw the hesitation flicker across his face, the calculation. Sarah's hand slipped into his, her fingers tightening just enough. She leaned into him, whispering something I couldn't hear. He didn't come to me. Instead, he cleared his throat and said, "Mom, maybe you should sit these events out from now on. We don't want anyone getting hurt." "Mom." The word felt foreign in his mouth. Something inside my chest cracked, quieter than the breaking glass but far more painful. I had raised that boy alone after his father died. I had worked nights and weekends, built an empire with one hand while holding his future in the other. And now he stood there, choosing comfort over conscience, siding with the woman who had just humiliated me in front of his entire company. Sarah stroked his arm, her voice soft and sweet. "I've been telling him you need rest, Evelyn. Less stress. It's for your own good." Around us, people nodded. They always do. Power attracts agreement like flies to sugar. Compliments began to rain down on Sarah about her leadership, her composure, how well she handled the situation. Someone praised her grace under pressure. Another joked that she'd saved the evening. I was helped to my feet by a junior employee whose hands shook as much as mine. Someone pressed a napkin to my bleeding arm. The music resumed, louder than before, as if the band had been instructed to drown out the discomfort. I stood there, soaked, bleeding, invisible. That was the moment I understood the full truth. Sarah didn't just want attention, she wanted erasure. She wanted me gone quietly, publicly, permanently. And Michael was already drifting away from me, pulled by her gravity, manipulated one small moment at a time, until distance felt normal. My heart broke for him, not for myself, because as painful as that night was, as humiliating as the fall and the laughter and the blood had been, I knew something none of them did. Every single one of them would be paid at the end of the month because I allowed it. And Sarah, smiling, applauded. Untouchable Sarah had no idea that the woman she had just called useless was the one who still signed her paycheck. I left the party without another word, my arm wrapped in a stained napkin, my head held high. I wasn't done. Not even close. If you felt that pain too, tap like and drop your city in the comments below. Who knows? Someone near you might be watching this right now. The drive home was quiet, but not in the peaceful way I used to enjoy. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and reminds you of every word you wish you hadn't heard. I drove with one hand, the other holding a cold napkin against the cut on my arm. Blood had stopped flowing, but the sting remained, sharp and insistent, just like Sarah's voice. Chicago's skyline flickered behind me in the rearview mirror. I watched the lights fade into the distance as I crossed the bridge back to the south side, where I still lived in the same red brick house I bought 30 years ago. I could have moved, could have lived somewhere more modern, but that house had memory in its walls. That house knew who I was before they tried to forget me. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a long moment in the car, engine idling, my fingers clenched around the steering wheel. Not from rage. No, I was past rage. This was something colder, something steadier. Inside, the house greeted me with silence and warmth. The kitchen smelled faintly of cinnamon from the potpourri I kept on the counter. I flipped on the light, walked past the living room, and headed straight for the bathroom. As I peeled off the soaked navy dress, I stared at myself in the mirror. The cut on my arm wasn't deep, but it had turned angry and red. I cleaned it carefully, the antiseptic stinging more than I'd admit. My knees were bruised, my hips sore, but I didn't flinch. What hurt more wasn't on my skin. It was the way Michael had looked at me. Or didn't. I wrapped the wound and changed into a housecoat. Then I moved to my study, a modest room off the hallway lined with oak shelves and old books. The desk was neat, except for a small pile of mail I hadn't touched in a week. On top sat a white envelope with my attorney's return address in the corner. I slid it open without much thought. Inside was a reminder. I still held fiduciary power over the company. Not just a title, not just a ceremonial board seat, but the legal authority to approve, deny, or withhold financial action, including payroll and executive bonuses. Sarah had never questioned it because she didn't even know it existed. I had remained quiet out of respect for Michael's leadership, thinking that peace meant letting go. But I hadn't let go. I had simply stepped back. I leaned forward and turned on the desk lamp. The warm yellow light washed over the surface, illuminating a stack of quarterly financial statements I'd requested from accounting a month ago. They were still unopened. I had almost forgotten why I'd asked for them in the first place. Almost. Now I remembered. Back in September, I noticed a sudden spike in marketing expenditures. I'd asked for details, and Sarah had responded with a short, polite email thanking me for my continued interest and assuring me the costs were approved by senior management. It was coded language. She meant herself. I didn't follow up at the time. I was tired. The summer had drained me, and I thought maybe it wasn't worth the trouble. That's how it starts, you know. The unraveling, not with disaster, but with surrender. I opened the financial report and began reading. Line by line, column by column. Sarah's name didn't appear directly, of course, but I knew the project codes. I recognized the vendor names. She was moving money around, and not subtly. Something was off. I pulled out a yellow notepad and started jotting notes. Vendor A used to charge $12,000 per quarter. Suddenly, they were billing $28,000. A new consulting firm had appeared, no contract on file. Digital ad buys with inflated CPMs. None of this was new to me. I'd seen these games before, back when I was fighting for credibility in a room full of old boys who thought a woman's place was reception. But this wasn't about money. This was about control. Sarah wanted to erase me, not because I was in her way, but because I reminded her she didn't build what she stood on. I did, and no matter how many heels she clicked or speeches she gave, the foundation was still mine. I sat back in the chair, listening to the hum of the radiator kick on. Outside, the streetlight flickered. I thought about Michael, about the way he'd looked at me as if I were fragile, embarrassing, a problem to manage. That hurt more than any fall. He had always been a sweet boy, thoughtful, loyal. But Sarah had changed him, slowly, cleverly. She didn't need to argue with me. She just needed to distance him. And it was working. Until tonight. Tonight, she pushed too far, made herself too visible. No one gets away with a performance like that without consequences. I reached for the pen beside the financial statement, the same one I used to sign my first business license 30 years ago. Its gold trim was worn, the ink faded but still strong. I clicked it. Then I wrote at the top of the notepad, "Immediate audit, marketing department, not out of revenge, not even out of pride, out of duty. Because justice doesn't scream, it signs quietly and watches the ripples unfold." I've always believed that you don't need to raise your voice to be heard, especially when you have the power to write checks. The next morning, before the sun rose, I was already in my kitchen, grinding fresh coffee beans and waiting for the kettle to sing. My arm ached from the fall, but I didn't care. The bruise on my hip had bloomed dark overnight, turning from red to a dull purple. But again, I didn't care. Pain reminds you you're alive. But purpose? Purpose wakes you up before dawn. I carried my mug into the study, still in my robe and slippers, and reopened the folder of quarterly reports. The night before, I had only skimmed the surface. Now, I was ready to dig. Marketing department. That's where Sarah reigned, and conveniently, it was also where the largest budget spikes had occurred. I pulled out a legal pad and started a list. Vendor names, amounts, dates, project codes. I didn't need a forensic accountant to tell me something stank. But I wanted more than suspicion. I needed a trail. I flipped back through archived records from previous years, the ones I had kept printed and filed, much to everyone's annoyance. "We're digital now, Evelyn," Sarah had once said. "No one uses hard copies anymore." Well, bless her heart. The hard copies told me something the digital files didn't. There was a vendor that didn't exist last year, Elevate Edge Solutions. The name appeared 3 times on the recent invoices. Once for consulting services, once for event coordination, and again for digital market optimization. Total, $88,000 in 3 months. I typed the company name into Google. Nothing. No website, no phone number, no LinkedIn page, not even a business listing. That wasn't just suspicious. That was deliberate. I sat back, staring at the screen. My fingers drummed against the edge of the desk. This wasn't just bad accounting, it was laundering. Sarah had created or contracted with a ghost company, which meant someone was helping her. No one gets a fake vendor approved without help from inside. I reached for my cell phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Jasmine, sweetheart," I said when she answered groggily. "I hope I didn't wake you." "Mrs. Thomas? Oh, no, I was just... Wow, hi, it's been forever." Jasmine used to be a junior accountant at the company. Young, smart, and sharp as a tack. I'd always liked her. She left 2 years ago for a quieter job at a nonprofit, said the corporate grind wasn't for her, but she still remembered where the bones were buried. "I'm just checking in," I said. "Missed our coffee chats. You keeping out of trouble?" She laughed, and we talked for a minute before I guided the conversation where I needed it to go. "You remember Elevate Edge Solutions?" I asked casually. Silence. That doesn't sound familiar. Is it one of our vendors?" I smiled into the phone. "It is now, but I don't remember it being one of ours back when you were in the books." More silence. "Do you want me to look into it?" she asked softly. "Not officially," I replied. "Just keep it between us for now." Jasmine promised to poke around discreetly. I thanked her, hung up, and felt something shift inside me. Not satisfaction, not yet, but traction. Sarah had gotten too comfortable. She thought her charm and polished presentations could cover the gaps. And why wouldn't she? No one had questioned her. Michael certainly hadn't. He was too dazzled by her ambition, too tired to look closely at the reports. Maybe he didn't want to know. But I did. I went back to my desk and began a new list. This time I titled it, Paths to Exposure. I outlined what I knew, what I suspected, and what I needed. Evidence, witnesses, patterns. I wasn't planning to storm the building or yell in a board meeting. No, that wasn't my style. I was going to build a case. Because when you've lived long enough, you learn that silence is a tool. And patience? Patience is a weapon. I didn't confront Sarah. Not the next day. Not the day after that either. Instead, I watched her. There's a difference between looking and seeing. For years, I had looked at Sarah the way you look at weather, something you acknowledge but don't question. Now, I saw her. Every movement, every pause, every calculated smile. 3 days after the party, I decided to attend a departmental meeting I'd been politely excused from for months. Marketing strategy review. Mid-morning. Glass conference room on the 12th floor. The kind of meeting where people like to perform intelligence rather than practice it. When I walked in, the room stilled. Not completely. Just enough. Sarah was already there, standing at the head of the table, tablet in hand, heels perfectly aligned beneath her. She glanced up, surprise flickering across her face for a split second before she recovered. "Evelyn," she said brightly, "I didn't know you were joining us." "I didn't know I needed permission," I replied calmly, taking a seat near the middle of the table. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others avoided my eyes. The younger ones, those eager to climb, watched Sarah instead, waiting for her cue. She smiled. Of course she did. "Well," she said lightly, "it's always nice to have historical perspective." Historical. I wrote the word down in my notebook. The meeting began. Sarah paced as she spoke, confident, articulate, charming. She talked about innovation, about cutting outdated processes, about how the company needed to fully embrace the future. "And sometimes," she added, laughing softly, "that means knowing when to let go of the past." Several people chuckled. A few nodded enthusiastically. I felt the sting, but I kept my face neutral. This wasn't the first time she'd framed progress as replacement. She was careful never to use names, but the implication always landed where she intended. She clicked through slides filled with numbers and buzzwords, growth curves, engagement metrics, brand positioning, all impressive on the surface, but I noticed what she skipped. She never mentioned the ballooning vendor costs. She never addressed the missing documentation, and she shut down questions with practiced ease. "That's outside the scope of today's agenda. We'll take that offline. Trust me, the data supports it. Trust me." I glanced at Michael, seated across the table. He watched her like a man watching a storm, awed, a little afraid, convinced he couldn't control it but unwilling to step away. When our eyes met, he looked uncomfortable. Then he looked down at his notes. He didn't speak up. Again, the meeting ended with polite applause. People gathered their things, voices low, glances quick. As they filed out, I lingered, pretending to reorganize my bag. That's when I heard it. Sarah was standing near the door with 2 managers, both younger, both ambitious. "We can't keep tiptoeing around legacy expectations," she said, her voice low but confident. "At some point, you have to clean house. The company can't move forward if it's dragging old weight behind it." One of them laughed. "You're brave for saying that." "Ein Servant," she smiled. "I'm just honest." I closed my bag slowly. That night, Michael called me. His voice was polite, controlled, professional. "Mom," he said, "I heard you sat in on the marketing meeting." "I did." There was a pause. "You know Sarah's team is under a lot of pressure right now. She's trying to manage expectations." "I didn't interrupt," I said. I observed. Another pause. Longer this time. "Sarah feels like you don't trust her," he said finally. I closed my eyes. "Michael," I said gently, "do you trust her?" Silence. Not because he didn't hear me, because he didn't know how to answer. "I just want everyone to work together," he said instead. "We don't need tension." Tension. That word again. As if truth were the problem, as if my presence itself created friction. "I raised you to ask questions," I said quietly. "Not to avoid them." He sighed. "I'll talk to you later, Mom. I have another meeting." The line went dead. I sat there in my living room, phone still in my hand, and felt the weight of something settling in my chest. It wasn't anger. It was grief. Grief for the boy who used to call me for advice. Grief for the son who once believed I could fix anything. Grief for the way Sarah had slipped between us, not all at once, but inch by inch, until distance felt natural and silence felt easier. That night, I returned to my notebook and wrote one sentence beneath the list I'd started days earlier. She is not just stealing money, she is rewriting the story. And I knew then, with absolute clarity, that this was no longer just about corporate misconduct. This was about erasure, and I would not disappear quietly. The cafe was small and tucked into a quiet corner of West Roseland, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. That's why I chose it. I arrived early, chose a booth in the back, and ordered black coffee. No cream, no sugar. Just the way I'd been drinking it since the days when I had to stay awake long enough to finish payroll by hand. Those nights seemed far away now, but they lived in my bones. Jasmine slid into the seat across from me 5 minutes later. She looked older than I remembered, more grounded. She wore a wool coat too big for her and dark-rimmed glasses that made her look younger than she was. "I brought something," she said without preamble, pulling a folder from her bag. My fingers closed around it without hesitation. "Tell me," I said. She leaned in, voice low. "Elevate Edge isn't a registered business in Illinois. I checked state records. Nothing under that name. No license. No EIN. No business tax filings. It doesn't exist." I opened the folder. Inside were 3 invoices. All billed to our company. All for vague consulting work. All marked urgent. "Here's the kicker," she continued. "The payments went through, but the bank account tied to the vendor is personal. It doesn't belong to a business. It's a private checking account." I looked up sharply. "Whose?" She hesitated. I couldn't trace it directly, but the account was opened under an alias, someone with a similar name to Sarah's old college roommate. I'm guessing a fake. I exhaled slowly. The pieces were fitting together faster than I expected. "She's not just hiding money," Jasmine added. "She's siphoning it. It's Telvime." I nodded. "How many people know?" "No one who'd speak up," she said quietly. "Not without backup." That much I already knew. Sarah had been too smart to act alone, but smart enough to keep her circles scared and small. She placed her people in all the right places: HR, procurement, even board liaisons. Anyone who questioned her suddenly found themselves reassigned, isolated, or quietly let go. I looked down at the invoices again. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about power. "She's trying to own the narrative," I said. Jasmine nodded. "And if you hadn't asked, no one would have caught it." I folded the documents carefully and slid them into my handbag. "Will you be okay?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "I trust you." We parted with a silent handshake. No hugs, no goodbyes. Back home, I locked the folder in my safe and opened my laptop. I started drafting a report not to submit yet, but to build the foundation. I included every invoice, every email Sarah had sent regarding vendor approvals, every expense with discrepancies. But numbers weren't enough. I needed timing, patterns. I needed to show that this wasn't incompetence, it was theft with intention. I pulled up the personnel directory. Names I hadn't looked at in a while flashed across the screen. Names that used to mean something. Now I read them like puzzle pieces. Sarah had moved quickly. 6 new hires in the last year. 4 internal promotions. All of them, according to HR logs, interviewed or endorsed by Sarah. Most of them reported to her directly now. She wasn't just building a team. She was building insulation. That night, I made another list. Assets Sarah controls. 1. Marketing Department, DO, PR and Communications. 3. Executive Assistant to the CEO. 4. 2 voting members on the board. 5. Internal HR Leadership. The 5th one troubled me the most. If she could control HR, she could suppress complaints, hide whistleblowers, or retaliate under the radar. I needed to move faster, but not recklessly. There was one weapon Sarah didn't have: my history. The older board members, the ones who'd stood beside me in the early years, they might have grown quiet, but they hadn't forgotten where their dividends came from. If I could bring the truth to them before Sarah silenced me completely, I still had a chance. But I needed more than numbers. I needed names, stories, eyewitnesses, people like Jasmine, quiet insiders who still believed in something other than survival. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. It was time to start building a coalition, not just to expose Sarah, but to remind this company where it came from. Finding allies isn't just about trust, it's about memory. The older a company gets, the more people forget why it exists. They forget who laid the bricks. But memory, real memory, lives in people. And I knew where to find them. I started with Leonard. He was one of the founding board members, now semi-retired but still holding a seat at the table. We had built this thing together through bankrupt clients, late nights, and deals sealed over burnt diner coffee. He was a numbers man, prudent, cautious, but not stupid. We met at a jazz lounge on the north side, the kind with leather booths and quiet corners where no one cared who you were as long as you tipped well. "You look tired," Leonard said, sliding into the booth. "I'm awake," I replied, and placed the folder in front of him. He opened it without a word. His eyes moved across the pages, slowly at first, then faster. When he got to the vendor invoices, he stopped and read them twice. "Hell," he muttered. "She's bold." I did. "She thinks she's safe," I said. "She thinks no one's watching." He exhaled, leaned back. "And Michael?" I looked away. "He's compromised. Not intentionally, but she's wrapped around every corner of his life." Leonard nodded grimly. "I've been watching her speeches. She's charming, but she's consolidating. I warned a few board members last quarter, but they said she's fresh energy." "She's energy, all right," I said, "like a match in a dry field." He gave a soft grunt. "She's got 2 votes in her pocket, Marla and Jenkins. Young blood, they like her ambition. They think you're," he hesitated, "past your prime." I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse. "Then it's time I remind them what Prime built." Leonard folded his hands. "You want me to call an emergency session?" "Not yet. I need 2 things first. Evidence of deliberate misconduct and a majority who'll listen. That's going to take leverage." "I'm working on it." He tapped the folder. "You've got the start of something, but it's going to get ugly." "I'm not afraid of ugly," Leonard smiled. "No, you never were." Back at home, I pulled out my old contact ledger, yes, the physical one. Yellowed pages, names written in ink, some scratched out, some circled, some underlined 3 times. These were people who remembered, who had fought with me in the trenches of those first brutal years. Most had retired, a few had died, but some still answered their phones. I called Brenda first. She'd run operations until her arthritis forced her into early retirement. We hadn't spoken in months, but she picked up after the second ring. "Evelyn," she said, her voice warm with surprise. "Are you okay?" "No," I said, "but I'm getting there." By nightfall, I had spoken to 4 former department heads, 2 retired board observers, and 1 executive assistant who now worked in real estate. Every conversation was the same: disbelief, concern, and beneath it all, loyalty. They remembered who built this company. They remembered me. But loyalty wasn't enough. I needed results. So I drafted a motion, a formal request for a special board session, citing fiduciary discrepancies and ethical concerns. It wasn't an accusation, not yet. It was a call for oversight. I signed it. Then I stared at the name line for a long moment. Evelyn Thomas, founder and fiduciary officer. It still meant something. Before I submitted it, I needed Michael to see it. Not to ask permission, but because he needed to know this was happening with or without him. I emailed the document, attached the supporting files, and wrote a single sentence in the body of the message. "I taught you to stand for what's right. I hope you remember." Then I hit send and waited. Michael didn't respond. Not to the email, not to the documents, not even to the voicemail I left asking to meet. At first, I told myself he was busy, overwhelmed, caught between his mother and his wife. But by the 3rd day, I knew better. He was avoiding me. So I went to the building. I wore navy slacks, a cream blouse, and the brooch his father gave me the day we opened our first office, tiny rubies shaped like a phoenix. It was meant to be symbolic. Now it felt like armor. The receptionist smiled awkwardly when I entered. Her fingers froze over her keyboard. "Good morning, Miss Thomas." Action. "Good morning," I said. "I'm here to see my son." She picked up the phone, whispered something, and then smiled too quickly. "I'm so sorry. Michael's in meetings all day. His assistant said he's unavailable." I nodded, but didn't move. Then I saw her. Sarah. She was walking down the corridor with a young man trailing behind her, one of the newer recruits, probably in PR. Her heels clicked with precision. She hadn't seen me yet. "I don't care what the caterer said," she snapped, handing him a glossy folder. "We're not pushing the event again. Friday is non-negotiable." He fumbled the folder. "But the venue—" "Fix it," she interrupted. "This launch is critical. Do you understand? This is the face of the company now." She glanced toward the lobby and saw me. For a moment, just a flicker, her expression shifted. Then she smiled. "Evelyn," she said, stepping toward me, "we weren't expecting you." "And it's now our fist." "I noticed," I replied. Her assistant caught up and handed her a phone. She glanced at the screen. "I'm afraid I'm late for a planning session. Big week." "I heard. Friday, isn't it?" I said, voice even. Her smile froze. "Just a little PR event." "That's funny," I said. It sounded like a full rebranding launch. She blinked once. "Why are you here?" "To see my son," I said, "and to remind this company that rebranding doesn't erase its foundation." Tim. I turned and walked out before she could reply. Outside, the wind was sharp, slicing through my coat, but I barely felt it. Sarah was planning something bigger than I thought. If she pulled off a company-wide relaunch, a campaign designed to position her as the visionary leader, she could justify every inflated invoice as part of brand development. She'd bury the fraud beneath applause and media coverage. Worse, she'd rewrite the company's story with herself as the author. And Michael? If he stood next to her at that podium, it would be an endorsement, a closing of ranks. I couldn't let that happen. That night, I called Leonard. "I need a delay," I told him. "We can't let the board be swept up in her PR storm." "She's moving fast," he said. "There's chatter already. Some think it's refreshing." "It's a cover," he exhaled. "We need something explosive." "I'm working on it," because now I knew. This wasn't just a theft. It was a takeover. I always said the devil doesn't show up with horns. He comes smiling, with a flawless press release and hors d'oeuvres on a silver tray. Sarah's launch event was scheduled for Friday evening. 5 days. 5 days until she stood on a stage wrapped in spotlight and marketing fluff, telling the world how she was the future of the company I built. Unless I stopped her first. I started with the event vendor, not through the front door. No, people like Sarah always assume you'll go straight at them. Instead, I contacted them anonymously, pretending to be a corporate sponsor considering a last-minute investment partnership. It worked. The coordinator, some young thing named Tyler, was eager to impress. "Oh yes," he gushed over the phone. "It's going to be our biggest launch this quarter. Sarah has huge plans for it." I smiled into the receiver. "And the budget?" She secured a $600,000 push from marketing and another $250,000 from special projects. My fingers tightened around the pen. "Special projects?" "Oh yes," he said cheerfully. "She told us that budget line was cleared by board-level approval. We've already wired 2/3 for the venue, lighting, and press." Interesting. Those weren't numbers that had been reported. Not in any ledger I'd reviewed. I asked one final question. Did she provide verification for her authority to spend those funds? "She said she is the authority," Tyler laughed. "She's practically running the place, isn't she?" I ended the call, but not before hitting record. That night, I added a new file to my growing evidence folder. Unauthorized fund use, event fraud. Still, it wasn't enough to cancel the event. Not yet. Sarah had woven herself too tightly into the executive narrative. I needed someone from inside, someone willing to speak. The universe, it seemed, was listening. At 11:08 p.m., my phone rang. The voice was low, nervous, young. "I know who you are," he said. "I know what you're doing. I think you should see something." "Who is this?" I asked. "I work in PR," he whispered. "Sarah isn't who she says she is. I have files, proof, but I can't send them. She tracks emails. I want to meet." "Why now?" "Because what she's doing, it's not just unethical, it's illegal." Silence passed between us. Then I asked, "Where?" "Company parking lot. Basement level. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. "Why the secrecy?" "She has eyes everywhere." He hung up. I sat for a long time, the glow of the desk lamp bathing the room in gold. I wasn't afraid. I was ready. Because Sarah might have built herself a stage, but I still held the spotlight. The air in the basement parking lot was damp and heavy. Fluorescent lights flickered above, casting shadows that danced just a little too long behind each car. I parked near the far wall, engine off, windows cracked. The silence was thick, almost unnatural. I checked the time, 25:69 p.m. Then, footsteps. He emerged from behind a concrete pillar. Young, maybe early 30s, nervous hands, wide, cautious eyes. His ID badge still hung from his belt. Daniel M. Communications. "Are you Evelyn Thomas?" he asked, voice tight. "I am." End quote. He glanced around, then approached my window. "I don't have long." I opened the door and stepped out slowly. "You worked with Sarah?" He nodded. "PR analytics. I helped compile internal metrics for press packets, shareholder presentations, and manipulation." "Explain." "She inflates media performance, fabricates data, uses fake engagement to convince the board and outside investors that her campaigns are successful." "And no one noticed?" "They did, a few. But when they questioned her, she moved them, or pushed them out quietly." His voice broke. "She said I was too analytical, that I didn't see the vision." I believed him. "What do you have?" He looked over his shoulder, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small USB drive. "This has everything. Original performance reports, email threads between Sarah and a digital firm she owns under a different name, even a video." "A video?" He hesitated. "One of my colleagues recorded a meeting by accident, Sarah, ordering the deletion of files, saying, 'No one needs to see the dry numbers. They kill momentum.' That was the kind of sentence you didn't explain away." I took the USB, slipping it into my coat. "Why now?" I asked. "Because this launch?" His voice dropped to a whisper. "It's a cover for a merger. She's negotiating a buyout behind the board's back. If it goes through, this company won't be yours anymore. It won't even be your son's." I'm saddened. A chill ran down my spine. Then footsteps. Not Daniel's. He heard them too. "Go," he said, stepping back. "You can't be seen here." "What about you?" "I'll be fine." I didn't believe him, but I respected his choice. I got in the car and drove away slowly, careful not to draw attention. In the rearview mirror, I saw him vanish back into the shadows. Back home, I plugged in the USB. The files were real, the video was damning, and the clock was ticking. Sarah had 5 days. I had 4. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The USB drive sat like a glowing ember in my desk drawer, humming with the weight of truth. Not just spreadsheets and manipulated data, but intention. Premeditated deceit. Corporate betrayal dressed up in silk and spotlight. By morning, I had compiled a folder, digital and hard copy. Evidence sorted, labeled, watermarked. The video alone was damning enough. But I wasn't building a bomb. I was building a bridge. One that would bring the board back to their senses before Sarah could blow it all up. At 7:30 a.m., I called Leonard. "She's fast-tracking the merger," I said. Friday morning, quiet signature, private room. He cursed under his breath. "Then we're out of time. I need the board in one place tonight." He was silent for a moment. Then, "There's a pre-event briefing at 6. Sarah's invited the board and the senior execs. Wine, talking points, ego-stroking. Perfect." End quote. "You're going to crash it?" "I'm going to reclaim it." I hung up and dialed another number, Marla Jenkins, one of the swing votes. She answered coolly. "Evelyn, I'd like 5 minutes of your time," I said. "Private, before tonight's meeting." "I'm not sure that's appropriate." "It's necessary." A pause. Then, 5 minutes. At 3 p.m., I met her in the lobby cafe. She was guarded, polished, a lawyer by training and cautious by habit. I handed her a sealed folder. "This is what you're about to endorse," I said. She read the top page. Then the next. Her fingers tightened. This is criminal." "Yes. And Michael? I don't think he knows. Not fully. But Sarah does." She closed the folder slowly. "If you want your name clear when this goes public," I said gently, "you'll stand with me tonight." She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. By 5:45 p.m., I was in the building. I wore black, not for mourning, but for battle. The meeting room was dressed like a gallery. Soft jazz, hors d'oeuvres, expensive wine. Sarah stood near the front, radiant in red, holding court with a circle of executives. When I entered, she turned and faltered, but only for a second. "Evelyn," she said, smiling. "Didn't expect to see you." "I'm full of surprises," I replied. I walked straight to the center table and placed the folder there. "This meeting is now under fiduciary review," I announced. The documents inside outline a pattern of fraud, manipulation, and breach of trust committed by Sarah Mitchell. Gasps. Chairs shifted. Sarah's smile fractured. "You don't have that authority," she snapped. "I built this company," I said. "I am the authority." Leonard stood beside me. Then Marla. And one by one, the room changed. Tonight, she wouldn't win. There are moments when silence is the loudest sound in the room. After I placed the folder on the table, that's all there was: silence. Tense, brittle, about to shatter. Sarah's smile cracked at the edges, but she held it, like a politician caught in bad lighting. "Let's all take a breath," she said, voice carefully measured. "This is clearly a misunderstanding." Leonard spoke next. "I've reviewed the documents. The allegations are credible." Marla nodded. "And serious. The board has a responsibility to act. Actionin." Sarah's eyes flicked toward the door calculation behind her lashes. She was already mapping her next move. Damage control, denial, reframing. Then the door opened. Michael walked in. He froze when he saw the room. "What's going on?" he asked. Sarah turned to him instantly. "She's making wild accusations, trying to derail the launch." "She has evidence," Leonard said flatly. Michael's eyes shifted to me. I didn't speak right away. I wanted him to feel the weight. Then softly I said, "I emailed you everything." He looked down, guilty. "I didn't have time." "You had days," I interrupted. "You had choices." Sarah stepped in, too quickly. "We don't need theatrics. This is a personal vendetta." I turned to her. "You forged documents, laundered money through fake vendors, manipulated data to mislead investors, and planned a secret merger without board consent." She bristled. "You can't prove any of that." Experience stated, "I am start to." I reached into my bag and pulled out the USB. "This holds more proof than your entire career." Michael looked at it, then at Sarah. "You lied to me?" he asked her. Her face fell. "Michael, you have to understand." "I don't," he said. His voice was quieter than mine, but it landed harder. "I trusted you," he continued. "I defended you to my mother, to the board. I let you into every part of my life. And you," his voice broke, "you used it." Sarah's lips parted, but no sound came. Then Michael turned to the board. "I move that we halt all launch activities and enter an executive review session." Leonard raised a hand. Seconded. Marla. Thirded. Sarah took a step back. "This isn't over," she hissed at me. I met her eyes. "No," I said. "It's just beginning." The meeting adjourned with instructions to reconvene at 9 a.m. for a formal vote. I walked out into the night, shoulders straighter than they'd been in months, one step closer. The boardroom was cold that morning, colder than usual, not from the temperature, but from what had settled in the air. Truth, sharp and unforgiving. I sat at the far end of the long oak table, Leonard beside me, Marla opposite, Michael at the head, palms pressed together, eyes unreadable. Sarah was last to enter. She looked different. Not weaker, but smaller. The poise was still there, the designer suit still perfect, but the power she carried, it flickered. Michael opened the session. "We are convened under emergency executive authority," he said. "Our agenda is to examine the evidence presented against Sarah Mitchell and determine immediate next steps. No small talk, no smiles, just business." I was first to speak. I outlined everything: the fake vendor accounts, the falsified media reports, the fabricated engagement numbers. Then came the merger documents, unsigned but prepared, buried deep in her email archives. I ended with the video. It played on the overhead screen, Sarah's voice, clear and cold. "Delete the original files. They kill momentum. We'll rewrite the report. No one reads the dry stuff anyway." When the screen went dark, no one moved. Not even Sarah. Then she stood. "I didn't mean," she began, voice trembling. "It wasn't malicious." She tried tears. They came on cue. "I was trying to prove myself. To you. To everyone. I've been under so much pressure." She looked at Michael. "I did it for us." "Ain't no example." He didn't flinch. "I didn't ask you to lie," he said. "But you let me," she whispered. The room went still again. Leonard cleared his throat. "This is not a matter of personal drama. It's corporate misconduct." Marla nodded. "We must vote." But Michael held up a hand. "I want to say something." The board waited. "I failed," he said, voice quiet. "Not just as a leader, but as a son. I ignored red flags. I chose peace over truth. I thought protecting Sarah meant protecting the company. I was wrong." He turned to me. "I'm sorry, Mom." I didn't speak. Didn't need to. He turned back to the board. "I vote to suspend Sarah Mitchell effective immediately and initiate a formal investigation." Leonard seconded. Marla thirded. The votes came, one by one. All in favor. Unanimous. Sarah didn't say a word as she stood, collected her things, and walked out. When the door closed behind her, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It wasn't victory I felt. It was relief. Justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. The news broke within hours. A leak, no doubt, though I couldn't say I was surprised. These things never stay contained, not in the age of headlines and hashtags. By lunchtime, every major outlet was calling it the fall of Sarah Mitchell. They used words like scandal, betrayal, deception. But I wasn't interested in headlines. I was interested in stability, because the fallout wasn't just on paper. It was in the hallways, whispers, worried glances, morale fraying at the edges. So I called a press conference. Small, controlled, held in the same boardroom where the truth had finally broken free. I stepped up to the podium, papers in hand, but I didn't read from them. "I founded this company," I began. "Not for profit, not for headlines, but for people. For families who needed a place to grow, to work, to believe in something bigger than themselves." I looked into the cameras. "We lost sight of that, but we will find our way back." Simple, honest, no drama. When it ended, reporters shouted questions. I answered a few carefully, calmly, then I walked out. The next morning, Michael came to my house. He looked tired, humbled, but there was clarity in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. "I want you back," he said. "Not happening," I replied. He smiled. "As interim CEO, just until we stabilize." I shook my head. "You don't need me at the helm. You need me beside you. Quiet, steady." He was quiet a long moment. Then, "Advisor?" "Mentor," I corrected. "The kind who tells you the hard truths." He nodded. Then, after a beat, "Thank you." That night, I sat by the window and looked out over the city. Not as a leader, not as a warrior, but as a keeper of legacy. Justice had begun its work. Now came the rebuilding. "I don't think she's even trying to win anymore," he whispered. "She just wants to burn everything down." I nodded slowly. "Because she knows she's already lost what matters." That night, I sat in my garden, an old iron chair, the roses blooming faintly in the early spring chill, and spoke to my husband like I used to. "I thought she'd break the company," I whispered. "I didn't think she'd try to break our son's heart." I didn't cry. I was too tired for tears. But I did make a decision. The next morning, I filed my own motion, a motion to hold Sarah in contempt for perjury and malicious prosecution. If she wanted war, she would get it. But on my terms. I also made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Luella Grant, one of the original employees who helped me and my husband launch Hale & Co. She was retired now, living in Arizona, but her memory was sharp as ever. "I remember everything, Margaret," she said. "And if she's trying to smear him, I won't stand by and let it happen. He was a good man, the cleanest businessman I ever knew. Would you testify?" With pride. Luella's deposition destroyed Sarah's narrative. She described the final years of my husband's life in perfect detail, how he handled every contract personally, how he insisted on clean audits every quarter, how he called me his anchor. "He trusted Margaret more than anyone," Luella said, voice trembling with age but firm. "If you're questioning his mind, then you never knew him at all." Roger filed the deposition with a motion to strike Sarah's latest claims as frivolous. We had a brief recess. Outside the courthouse, I found myself standing by a row of blooming dogwood trees. Their petals were falling gently in the breeze, delicate but relentless. David approached quietly. "I filed for divorce." I turned to him slowly. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "It took me too long, but I see her now. And I see what I almost became." I touched his face, brushing back a strand of hair like I used to when he was a boy. "You didn't become her. That's what matters." He looked away, voice soft. "I'm sorry it took me this long. I'm just glad you found your way back." As we re-entered the courthouse, I saw Sarah waiting by the doors, flanked by her lawyers. She looked smaller now, somehow, diminished. She met my eyes and didn't look away this time. There was no apology, no remorse, just cold, burning fury. And behind it, something else. Fear. The courtroom was quieter now, not because the trial had lost its momentum, but because the tone had shifted. What began as a public spectacle, a battle of egos wrapped in family drama, was evolving into something more solemn, more raw. The judge scheduled a day for closing testimonies and character evaluations. The lawyers would soon rest their cases. But before they did, Sarah had one final move to make. She took the stand again. This time, there was no pretense of victimhood. She came in armor-sleek, gray suit, no makeup, no tears. Her words were sharp, her tone aggressive. "I was made to feel like a second-class citizen in my own family," she began. "Margaret Hale resented me from the beginning. She never wanted to let go of her power. Everything she's done, from turning my husband against me to orchestrating this trial, is because she couldn't handle no longer being the center of attention." And in spest, there it was. Not pain, not trauma, jealousy. That was the story she wanted the jury to believe, that I had clung to relevance and lashed out at the woman who threatened to eclipse me. Roger stood slowly. "Mrs. Hale, may I remind you, you are under oath." "I'm aware," she snapped. "Then let me ask you one question. If Margaret Hale is so obsessed with power, why did she spend the last decade hiding her title from the entire company?" Sarah faltered. "What?" Roger held up a document. "Payroll records. Internal memos. Not once did she list herself as CEO. She remained on the books as an advisor, silent, invisible. If she was chasing the spotlight, she had a very strange way of showing it." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Roger turned to the judge. "No further questions." Sarah stepped down, stiff as a statue. That afternoon, it was my turn. I didn't take the stand with any dramatic flair. I walked slowly, deliberately. I didn't look at the audience. I spoke to the jury. "I never wanted to humiliate Sarah," I began. "I never wanted this to be public. I kept quiet for years, thinking if I made myself small, she'd stop pushing. I let her take credit, let her speak over me, let her undermine me in my own home. I thought I was protecting my son, my family." I paused, letting the silence settle. But silence isn't protection. It's permission. And she took everything I gave her and turned it into a weapon. "If we want to do ours, and if we want today," I looked over at David, who nodded quietly from the back row. "I may be older. I may not understand how to tweet or make a viral video, but I know the truth. And the truth is, Sarah didn't want family. She wanted control. She didn't want respect. She wanted obedience." I took a breath, and when she couldn't get it, she tried to erase me. My voice didn't shake. Not once. When I stepped down, even the judge watched me with a new expression, one that looked suspiciously like respect. The final day of arguments came swiftly. Both sides summarized their cases. Sarah's team leaned heavily on emotional framing, trying to paint her as a misunderstood outsider punished for ambition. They framed me as controlling, old-fashioned, afraid of progress. Roger was brief, surgical. He pointed to the evidence, the recordings, the video, the emails, the witnesses. He let the facts speak louder than emotion. When the jury was dismissed to deliberate, the room emptied out slowly. Everyone was bracing for the aftermath. In the hallway, Sarah brushed past me without a word. David followed at a distance, but paused as he reached me. "I don't know how this will end," he said quietly. "I do," I replied. "It ends with the truth. That's more than I could have hoped for." He looked down. "I should have believed you sooner." "No," I said gently. "You should have believed yourself." He didn't argue. Later that evening, I received another letter. No threats this time. No gloating. Just 4 words. "You'll never be enough." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. It wasn't written for me, it was written for herself. Sarah had finally realized she'd lost, and losing to someone she'd deemed worthless was a truth she would never be able to swallow. The jury returned 2 days later. It was a rainy afternoon, and I remember every detail: the way the courthouse windows fogged at the corners, the faint tap of water against the glass, the hum of whispered voices, waiting for a decision that would define more than just a verdict. David sat beside me this time. He hadn't said much that morning, just offered me his presence. And after everything, that was more than enough. When the foreperson stood, the room went silent. In the matter of Sarah Hale versus Margaret Hale, the judge said, "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." My fingers curled around the hem of my coat. I didn't pray. I didn't plead. I just breathed. "We find in favor of the defendant, Margaret Hale, on all counts." There it was. 4 simple words. In favor of the defendant. I didn't move. Didn't cry. I felt David's hand close around mine, and I turned to see his eyes shining not with celebration, but with relief, the kind that only comes when a long nightmare finally ends. Sarah sat motionless, her lawyers whispering furiously at her side. Her expression didn't change. She didn't cry, didn't rage. She just stared straight ahead like the reality hadn't yet reached her. Maybe it never would. The judge dismissed the jury and stood. I sincerely hope this case serves as a reminder that ambition, when divorced from ethics, becomes a weapon, and that the quiet strength of truth will always outlast the noise of deception. He didn't look at Sarah when he said it. He looked at me. Outside, the press swarmed like flies to honey. Cameras, flashbulbs, questions shouted over each other. "Mrs. Hale, how do you feel about the verdict? Do you plan to return to the company full-time?" Any comment for Sarah Hale? I didn't stop walking. I didn't owe the cameras anything. But as I reached the steps, I turned briefly and said, "No one wins in a war like this, but I'm proud to have told the truth, and I'm proud to still be standing. It is Seventubs Palanding, something one." Then I got in the car and left it all behind. The next few weeks moved in slow ripples. Sarah disappeared from public view. She filed no appeal. Rumors swirled she'd moved out of state, taken a consulting job under a new name, cut contact with her former circle. David finalized the divorce quietly. No drama, no demands. He moved into a smaller place, closer to the office, and started rebuilding not just the business, but himself. We met once a week now. Dinner, coffee, sometimes silence, sometimes laughter. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before Sarah, but it was honest. That made it better. One evening, over tea, he looked at me and said, "Do you ever wish it hadn't come to this?" I thought about it, then shook my head. "No, because now I know who I am, and I know you do too." He smiled faintly. "I used to think strength looked like Sarah, loud, fearless, unstoppable. And now?" He met my gaze. "Now I know strength looks like someone who stands back up even after their own son called them useless at a party." That caught me off guard, but it didn't hurt this time. I laughed soft, but real. "Better late than never," I said. On the anniversary of my husband's death, I returned to the cemetery for the first time since the trial. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with rain that never quite fell. I knelt by his grave and placed fresh lilies, his favorite. "They tried to tear us apart," I whispered. "But we're still here, the company, our son, me." I paused, fingers brushing the cool marble. "I finally found my voice, you know, and I used it." The wind stirred the trees gently. I took that as his answer. As I stood to leave, I felt something shift in me. Not closure stories like mine don't have tidy endings, but peace, the kind that comes when justice, at last, has whispered your name back to you. It was spring again by the time life began to feel normal. Or maybe not normal, just quieter. The kind of quiet that follows a storm, where the sky isn't clear yet, but at least the thunder has stopped. I returned to the office for the first time in months, not as a boss, not as a figurehead. Just Margaret. Just me. People stopped me in the halls with soft smiles and warm greetings. Some offered hugs, some offered apologies. None of it was necessary, but all of it was welcome. Roger had taken over most of my responsibilities during the trial, and I encouraged him to stay in that role. I no longer needed control. I needed peace. Still, I sat in on one of the team meetings, watched the young managers pitch their ideas with the kind of passion I remembered in myself decades ago. It made me proud, but also restless. Something had shifted in me. The trial had taken more than energy. It had taken my illusion that I still belonged in the daily rhythm of the company. I had fought so hard to protect the legacy, but maybe the real legacy was knowing when to let go. That night, I sat in my study, looking over old photographs, company picnics, launch parties, anniversary celebrations. My husband's laugh frozen in time. David as a teenager, awkward and brilliant. Even Sarah, once smiling genuinely, before everything turned. A letter sat on the edge of my desk. I'd received it the day before, from Sarah. I hadn't opened it yet. Part of me didn't want to, but something in me said I needed to. So I unfolded it slowly, expecting venom or blame. But it was short. Almost too short. I was wrong. About you. About everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I see it now. There was no signature. Just her handwriting. It didn't undo the damage. It didn't change what happened. But it was something. A crack in the armor. A glimpse of the woman she might have been, once. I tucked the letter away, not as a memento, but as a reminder. People change. Not always in time, but sometimes enough to say, I see it now. 3 days later, I got a call from a women's leadership organization I used to donate to years ago. They were hosting a retreat for women over 50 who had experienced workplace discrimination or family betrayal in business. They wanted me to speak. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't a public speaker. My story wasn't glamorous. It was messy, painful, deeply personal. But then I remembered the courtroom, the way truth had silenced 1,000 lies. And I said yes. The retreat was held in a lakeside conference center in Vermont. The room was filled with women, gray hair, laugh lines, strong hands. Every one of them carried a story. You could see it in their posture, in the way they nodded during each session like they'd lived the words being spoken. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium with my notes in hand, but didn't use them. I spent the last 2 years being told I was too old, too emotional, too stuck in the past. I began. But what they forgot was that age doesn't weaken you, it sharpens you. Emotional doesn't mean unstable, it means you feel deeply. And history, well, history is what makes wisdom. I told them about Sarah, about David, about the party, the fall, the courtroom, the lies, about how long I'd stayed quiet because I thought that was strength, and how it wasn't. Silence isn't strength, I said. Silence is survival. But truth is how we come alive again. When I finished, they stood, not clapping politely but standing, hands on hearts, some with tears, some with fists raised. It wasn't applause. It was solidarity. Afterward, a woman approached me, mid-60s, with deep-set eyes and a cane. "Thank you," she said. I didn't know I needed to hear that until today. I squeezed her hand. Neither did I. Back home, David came over for Sunday dinner like he used to before everything unraveled. He brought dessert apple pie from the bakery his father loved. We ate in the kitchen, laughter returning in small, unexpected bursts. At one point, he said, "You've changed." "I hope so." "No, I mean, you're lighter." I smiled. Maybe because I finally stopped carrying things that didn't belong to me. We clinked glasses, his sweet tea, my red wine. "To second chances," he said. "To earned peace," I added. And for the first time in years, I believed it was possible. The summer sun came early that year. It filtered through the kitchen windows before 6 a.m., soft and golden, like an old friend easing back into my life. I found myself waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The house felt lighter, somehow. Not emptier, freer. One morning, while sipping coffee on the porch, I received a call from Janet Palmer, an old friend and colleague who'd retired 5 years ago. We hadn't spoken since the funeral. "Margaret," she said warmly, "I saw the articles. I saw everything." I held my breath, expecting judgment or concern. She surprised me. "You did what most of us only dream about. You stood your ground and you didn't flinch. You should be proud." "I'm not sure proud is the word," I admitted. "Exhausted, maybe. Relieved." "Well, maybe it's time for something new," she said. "There's a space opening up on the advisory board for the Women in Business Foundation. We need a voice like yours." I hesitated. "Janet, I just spent the better part of a year battling in a courtroom. I don't know if I'm ready to sit on another board." "This isn't about power," she said. "It's about mentoring, supporting women who are where you once were. It's about reminding them that it's never too late to be heard." And to skilled. Her words stuck with me. That evening, David stopped by again. He was coming by more often now, each visit less tense, each conversation more like family. I told him about Janet's offer. He smiled. "Sounds perfect for you." "I'm not sure I want to be that visible again." He shrugged. "You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You taught me that." That night, I filled out the application. A month later, I attended my first board meeting in New York. The room was full of women, CEOs, investors, teachers, activists, all with stories that mirrored pieces of mine. During a roundtable discussion, a young woman asked, "What do you do when your family is the one holding you back?" I looked at her, saw myself in her eyes. "You tell the truth," I said, "even if your voice shakes, even if it costs you everything, because silence protects no one but the people who count on your fear." It's 7 days. The room went still. Then heads nodded, slowly, one by one. I spent the next few weeks mentoring a handful of women, some in their 40s just entering leadership roles, some in their 60s trying to reclaim their identities after lifetimes of being the wife, the mother, the background. I shared what I could. Not strategies or formulas, but what no one had told me. That dignity is a full-time job. That forgiveness doesn't always mean reunion. That sometimes the person you need to protect yourself from once called you family. These women didn't ask for pity. They wanted permission to fight for themselves, to take up space, and I gave it to them. Because someone had to. In the quiet moments between meetings and volunteer hours, I went through the house with a gentle hand. I cleaned out old drawers, donated clothes, reorganized the office I hadn't used since the trial began. In one file cabinet, tucked between tax returns and warranty receipts, I found a photograph I hadn't seen in years. David as a child, sitting on my lap. His father behind us, arms wrapped around us both. Sarah, off to the side, smiling stiffly but present. I studied her face. I tried to remember if, even back then, I had sensed the shift in her, or if I had simply chosen not to see it. I didn't feel anger anymore, or grief. Just clarity. She had made her choices. So had I. And now I was choosing to live in the after. One afternoon, after a speaking event in Boston, a woman approached me with a weathered notepad in her hand. She said her name was Tessa, and she had followed the case in every paper she could find. "I clipped every article," she said, blushing a little. "You reminded me of my mother. She was a fighter, too." I smiled. "Did she win?" "She didn't get the verdict she deserved," Tessa said, "but she found her voice in the end, just like you. She asked for a photo." I agreed. When she walked away, I felt it again, that subtle shift. The realization that my story had become something more than mine. It had become a mirror. At home that night, I sat by the fire, a book open on my lap, but unread. David called. "I met someone," he said, his voice cautious. "Oh?" "She's kind," he added quickly. "Quiet, no games." "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it. "You okay with that?" "I want you happy," I told him. "That's all I've ever wanted." We didn't speak long, but it was enough. After we hung up, I stared into the fire for a while, remembering a time when I thought happiness for him meant enduring whatever Sarah brought into our lives. How wrong I'd been, how far we'd come, and how far I still intended to go. The invitation came in a heavy, cream-colored envelope with embossed lettering and an unfamiliar return address. I opened it with curiosity, expecting perhaps another networking event or a corporate gala. Instead, I found myself staring at a wedding invitation. "You are cordially invited to the marriage of David Hale and Emily Santos." I blinked. Emily Santos. He had mentioned her only once, quietly, cautiously. "She's kind," he'd said, but I hadn't asked for more. I hadn't needed to. I saw it in the way he said her name, soft around the edges, like someone discovering something fragile and precious. The ceremony would be small. A coastal chapel in Maine, just family and a few close friends. I sat with the invitation for hours that night, tracing the script with my fingers, thinking about how quickly time had folded in on itself. Just a year ago, my son had been married to a woman who tried to erase me. Now, he was starting over with someone who, I hoped, saw him for who he truly was. It would be my first wedding in years where I wasn't on edge, where I didn't have to watch my words or brace for veiled jabs. Still, I was nervous. Not because of Emily, but because of what weddings represent: hope, new beginnings, family reborn, and I had spent so long preparing for battle that I wasn't sure I remembered how to simply show up in peace. Maine was beautiful that weekend. Wind off the ocean, the smell of salt and cedar, a bed and breakfast run by an elderly couple who served blueberry scones and strong black coffee each morning. When I arrived at the chapel, David met me at the door, dressed in a charcoal gray suit and looking more like himself than he had in years. He hugged me. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You invited me." I smiled. "No, thank you for still being here." Eye contact. We stood there for a beat longer, the past suspended between us but not crushing anymore. "I want you to meet her properly," he added. Emily approached a moment later, late 30s, warm eyes, a gentle presence, not performative, not polished to perfection, just genuine. "It's so good to finally meet you," she said, shaking my hand with both of hers. I studied her. No masks, no edge, just kindness. "And you," I replied. "He smiles when he talks about you. That tells me everything." "And N24 that is no Brechted do." Her eyes shimmered slightly. "He says you're the strongest woman he's ever known." I blinked back the lump rising in my throat. "Well," I said, "he's got more of me in him than he realizes." The ceremony was intimate sunlight pouring through stained glass, the ocean audible in the distance. David and Emily exchanged vows that weren't grand, but true. There were no declarations of destiny, just simple promises, honest, earned. And when they kissed, I didn't feel the pang of past weddings or the shadow of Sarah. I felt peace. At the reception, David made a toast. "To second chances," he said. "To the kind of love that doesn't demand perfection, but grows in the soil of forgiveness." Then he turned to me, and to my mother, for showing me that dignity doesn't come from being loud, it comes from standing firm, even when no one else is clapping for you. The guests clapped. I didn't. I cried. Later, as the night wound down and guests danced beneath fairy lights strung across the lawn, Emily found me sitting alone at a table near the edge. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. "Of course not." She sat in silence for a moment, then said, "I want you to know I'm not trying to replace anything or anyone." "You're not," I assured her. "You're just here, and that's more than enough." She nodded. "He carries guilt. Sometimes I catch him staring into space. And I know he's thinking about the things he said to you, the things he didn't stop." "I know," I said quietly. "Do you ever regret it? Staying in the fight?" I looked up at the stars. "No. I regret staying silent for so long, but I don't regret standing up. Not anymore." She reached out and touched my hand. "I'm glad you did, or I might never have met him." And in that moment, I realized something. Sarah had tried to destroy everything, to control the story, burn the bridges, salt the earth, but in the end, the only thing she really destroyed was her place in our lives. Because we had rebuilt, stronger, wiser, freer. And Emily, this woman with kind hands and steady eyes, was proof that not every new chapter has to begin in fire. Some begin in grace. The first cool breeze of autumn whispered through the office windows that morning, carrying with it faint scents of maple and wood smoke like something out of an old New England postcard. It felt hopeful in a way that spring never had. Fresh starts came in many seasons, I'd learned, and sometimes they came with crisp air and long shadows. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification reminding me of the board retreat later that week. The theme was Leadership After Loss, and I had been asked to moderate a panel on resilience. As soon as I read the title, a quiet smile spread across my face. Resilience wasn't just a buzzword in my life anymore, it was a mark, a ledger of every battle I'd chosen to fight and every truth I'd refused to surrender. I arrived early to the office, as was my practice now, lingering over a cup of black coffee in the executive lounge, a place I used to avoid. Not because I was unwelcome, but because I'd once felt too fragile to inhabit spaces tied with memory. Now the room felt like a quiet victory, and I owned it simply by being there. Roger popped in with 2 mugs in hand without knocking, like he always had. He was older now, his hair nearly white, but his eyes still carried that sharp clarity he was known for. "Thought you might be here," he said, sliding a mug toward me. "You ready for this retreat?" I took the coffee. "As ready as I'll ever be." He let out a low laugh. "Soon you'll be training the trainers. Let's not get ahead of ourselves." But only just. We sat in silence a moment, looking out at the early fall leaves turning burnt orange and crimson. Sometimes I forgot how long I'd been in this company, how intertwined my life had become with its walls, hallways, and people. But every day reminded me, this wasn't just a profession. It was a community, a life. The retreat was held at an old conference center just outside of Boston, nestled among rolling hills and tall trees that refused to give in to the season's chill. Women gathered from across the country, CEOs, veterans, artists, teachers, spouses who found themselves in leadership by circumstance, not choice. I stood at the podium that first morning, light streaming through tall windows behind me. The room was filled with expectant faces, some worn by hardship, others bright with fresh hope. None of them knew me personally, but they knew my story. I opened gently. "Today," I said, "I want to talk about something that doesn't get mentioned enough in stories about success. It's not ambition, it's not talent, it's not even resilience, it's compassion for yourself." The room went still. When we face betrayal, whether in business, marriage, family, or friendship, we're conditioned to believe our response must be fierce. And while there is strength in standing up, there is equal strength in grounding yourself, in knowing you are more than the battles you survive. I recounted parts of the trial, not the spectacle, but the personal moments when I had to decide whether to defend my dignity or shrink back and let silence swallow me again. One woman raised her hand. "How do you decide when to let go and when to fight?" I thought of Sarah, of the courtroom, of the moments that tore at the seams of my identity. "You listen," I replied, "first to your values, then to your fear, and you ask yourself, which voice is trying to protect your future, and which is trying to protect your past?" Heads nodded, some pens took notes, some faces glistened with tears. Later that day, I sat on a terrace overlooking a river, the water shimmering beneath the early sunset. I felt a sense of peace that was so new it startled me. It was not the absence of conflict, it was the absence of fear. The next morning I walked into the final session with a quiet confidence. My panel was titled Legacy, What We Leave Behind. It felt fitting, a reflection not on the empire I protected, but on the impact I had on others. Midway through, a woman stood. She was tall, with soft gray hair pulled back in a braid. "I just want to thank you," she said. "My daughter was told she was too old to lead, but after hearing your story, she asked for the senior partner role she'd been denied, and she got it." I thanked formation. The room breathed with her joy. Not applause, not cheers, just shared understanding. I hugged her gently and walked back to the podium. That night, I returned to my hotel room and found an envelope on the pillow. No handwriting, no flourish, just the company logo embossed at the corner. I opened it. Inside was a single line. "Legacy is what stays when the war is over." No signature, but I knew who had sent it, and I allowed myself a small smile. Because I understood now, legacy isn't what you defend. It's what others carry forward. And suddenly, the idea of tomorrow didn't feel like a threat. It felt like possibility. The first time I returned to the old family estate, it was on a quiet afternoon in October. The trees stood half bare, their fallen leaves forming thick, rustling carpets across the winding drive. The house hadn't changed, much white shutters, brick pathway, the faint creak of the front porch that always gave away late arrivals. David had kept the property after the divorce, unsure of what to do with it. "Too many memories," he'd said, "both good and bitter." But now, he was thinking of renovating it into a space for family retreats, or perhaps converting it into a home for women in transition, a place for healing. When he asked if I'd visit one last time before deciding, I said yes without hesitation. The house welcomed me like an old friend, quiet, watchful, layered with echoes. I wandered from room to room, touching the edges of memories. In the dining room, I saw it all over again, the party, the sneers, the glass crashing, the blood, the silence that followed David's misplaced defense of Sarah. That room had swallowed my dignity once. Now it felt hollow, powerless. I stepped into the living room and stared at the old fireplace, where my husband used to read aloud to David on cold nights. His laugh, his warmth that had lived in these walls, and somehow it still lingered. Upstairs, I found David in the old study, his hands deep in a file cabinet. He looked up when I entered. "I was going through Dad's old blueprints," he said. He had ideas to build a training wing for the company here, like a place to mentor kids who didn't have family support. I smiled softly. "That sounds like him." David laid a few papers on the desk. "If you're willing, I'd like to name the space after him. Maybe a small foundation wing, the Martin Hale Initiative. You'd be on the board, of course." Something caught in my throat. Not grief. Not pain. Pride. "Nothing would make him prouder," I said. We stood in silence, both of us imagining the future, one born not from victory, but from transformation. Later that evening, I wandered out to the garden. It was overgrown now. Weeds tangled with roses, the bird bath cracked, the wrought iron bench rusting beneath the elm. But I didn't see decay. I saw resilience. Everything here had withstood the storm, the literal and the metaphorical. Even the ivy still climbed toward the sun, refusing to be stifled. I sat on the bench and closed my eyes. For years, I had been wrapped in silence, then swallowed by noise. Now I had found something rare. Stillness. Not the kind that feels like waiting, but the kind that feels like knowing. When David joined me a while later, he said nothing at first, just sat. Then he said, "You're different now." "I am. You've always been strong, but now you're at peace." "I earned it," I said simply. He nodded, looking around the garden. "I want to raise my kids to know what integrity looks like, to see it every day." I looked at him. "Then show them. Not by being perfect, but by being honest. And when you fail, apologize. When you succeed, stay humble." He gave a small laugh. "That sounds like you." "No," I said gently. "That sounds like who I finally allowed myself to become." Before leaving, I placed a small stone by the old oak tree near the garden's edge. It wasn't marked. No plaque, just a quiet symbol. Something to remind me, and whoever came after that strength had been planted here. That a woman had stood her ground, weathered betrayal, and refused to vanish. Legacy wasn't in the headlines. It was in the echoes of the hallways, the eyes of the children yet to walk them, the hands that would rebuild from the ashes. And mine would not be forgotten. Thanksgiving arrived with an early snow that year, dusting the rooftops and quieting the streets before morning coffee. It felt like a benediction, soft, still, merciful, the kind of day where the world invited you to pause and remember what mattered. David insisted on hosting. He and Emily had moved into a modest house on the edge of town, far from the grandeur of the estate and closer to what they called real life. It was the kind of place where neighbors brought over casseroles uninvited and children played freely on tree-lined sidewalks. I baked my signature pecan pie that morning, the way I always had crust made from scratch, filling laced with bourbon. The kitchen smelled like the past and the present in perfect harmony, and as I wrapped it carefully in foil, I felt something rare and precious settle in my chest. Joy. When I arrived, the house was alive with warmth. Laughter spilled from the kitchen. Music hummed from an old radio, and Emily met me at the door with flour on her cheek and a dish towel in her hands. "You came early," she smiled. "I come bearing pie," I said, lifting the tin. "Then you're forgiven." David emerged from the dining room carrying a tray of glasses, his smile wide and easy. "Mom, come in. Everything's almost ready." The dining table was set with mismatched china and candles in mason jars. A far cry from the polished silver and crystal Sarah used to insist upon. But this felt real. This felt like home. We sat down to eat just as the snow began to fall again, the windows fogged with warmth, and the air filled with the smells of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and cranberry sauce. At the head of the table, David raised his glass. "I want to start with gratitude," he said, "for Emily, for this new beginning, and most of all for my mother, who taught me that survival isn't the same as silence, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak." My eyes stung, but I smiled. Emily reached for my hand under the table. I squeezed hers. We ate. We laughed. We told stories. At one point, Emily's nephew knocked over a pitcher of tea, and instead of gasps and glares, the room erupted in laughter. Someone handed him a napkin. Someone else a cookie. It wasn't perfect. It was better. After dinner, I stepped outside for a moment to breathe in the cold air. The sky was turning lavender with the last light of day. Snow crunched beneath my boots, and the world was wrapped in a silence that wasn't empty but whole. David joined me a moment later, slipping his coat over his shoulders. "I've been thinking," he said. "That's dangerous," he chuckled. "I want to move forward with the foundation. Dad's dream. And I want you to co-chair it with me." I looked at him. "You're sure?" "I want it to stand for something real," he said. "Not just business, but redemption, healing, strength." I nodded slowly. "Then we build it, together." He smiled. "I thought you might say that." That night, back in my own home, I lit a fire and sat in the armchair by the hearth. On the mantel sat a framed photo from earlier that evening, David and Emily, cheeks flushed, arms wrapped around each other, eyes full of hope. Next to it, an older photo, my husband, holding baby David, both laughing, forever caught in a moment of joy. I looked at them both and whispered, "We're okay now. You'd be proud." And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt no ghosts in the room, only light. The sun rose gently on New Year's Day. No fireworks, no crowds, just golden light spilling over snow-covered rooftops and the quiet hum of a world beginning again. I stood by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, watching the first day of the year unfold with calm certainty. The house was still, peaceful. Every corner now belonged to someone who had survived something and chosen to keep living, including me. Later that morning, I pulled out the old journal I'd once buried in the back of my closet, where I had written only in private, only when the pain grew too loud to carry in silence. But this time, I wasn't writing out of desperation. I was writing from a place of deep stillness. The first line I wrote, "I am not who I was." And that was a good thing. The Martin Hale Initiative opened its doors in March. A small brick and glass building downtown, close to transit and city services, with clean lines and warm lighting. Inside were classrooms, mentorship offices, and open spaces for women to gather, to rest, to plan their next chapter. Many of them had lived through abandonment, betrayal, or quiet neglect, some in marriage, some in business, some simply by circumstance. We didn't ask for backstories, we asked about dreams. David and I co-hosted the opening event. He gave the speech, but I watched the faces in the crowd, faces that reminded me of myself not long ago. Some hopeful, some weary, all searching. When David introduced me, the applause caught me off guard. It wasn't polite. It was thunderous, earnest, like something they'd been waiting to give someone for a long time. I stepped up to the podium and took a breath. "I was called many things," I began. "Useless, cold, controlling. And for a time, I believed those things, because they came from people I loved, people I trusted." I looked out over the crowd. But the truth is, people only try to erase you when they fear your light, and I am no longer afraid of being seen. They rose to their feet before I finished. Not because I was eloquent, but because I was honest. And honesty has a sound to it like wind moving through a cracked door, like breath after being held too long. That summer, I planted new roses in the garden. The same color my husband used to love, deep red, full bloom, fragrant. I named the patch the second garden, not because it replaced anything, but because it honored what came after survival. Emily visited often now, sometimes with recipes, sometimes with questions about the foundation, sometimes just to sit and talk. She asked about my youth, about the early days of the company, about the mistakes I'd made and the courage I didn't know I had. And I answered everything, because if my story could help even one woman stand a little taller, then none of the suffering had been wasted. On the first anniversary of the trial's end, I returned to the courthouse not to relive anything, but to stand in the space and know that I had walked through it and come out whole. The courtroom was empty. I sat in the back row, folded my hands in my lap, and whispered to the silence, "I am still here." And that mattered. That was enough. As the years passed, I grew older, yes, but not smaller, not quieter. I grew more rooted, more deliberate. I said no more often. I laughed louder. I held babies. I buried friends. I danced at weddings. And one day, at a conference in Chicago, a young woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. "My mother made me read about you during a very dark time," she said. "I just wanted to say, I made it, because you did." I hugged her and whispered, "Now you help someone else make it. That's how we win." And so, I leave this story not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with grace. Because I have learned that justice is not always loud. Sometimes it is a quiet woman standing up at the edge of a room, refusing to disappear. Sometimes it is the mother you called useless signing your paychecks from behind the scenes. And sometimes it is the truth, whispered again and again until it cannot be ignored. This was my war. But peace was always the prize. This story is a powerful reminder that dignity and truth don't need to shout to be heard. It teaches us that no matter how deeply we're betrayed by family, by those we once trusted, we still have the power to reclaim our voice. Age, silence, or being overlooked doesn't diminish our worth. In fact, it is often in our quiet resilience that real justice is born. And sometimes, the most profound victories come not from revenge, but from standing tall with grace and showing the world that strength often wears the face of a mother once cast aside.